Right. It's like more people come, given it's on the syllabus. All right, so learning objectives for today. Why is sex weird, evolutionarily speaking? Why has it evolved? How does sex ratio evolve? And how does sexual selection evolve? Okay. But first, a few good questions. Get warmed up. So what is the closest relative to bonobos? Yep. Sometimes we see the variance of people's reading speeds as they go through and they see when people chuckle. Okay, 1 minute. Okay. And so this. And so most of you are right, chimps. Okay. And actually one interesting thing when talking about taxonomy is so chimps plus bonobos are our closest relatives. Right? And we didn't even recognize that chimps and bonobos were different species until the 1920s. Okay. So we have all the species in the earth. This is one we should be able to, understand the best. And yet we didn't really realize they're different species. We had them in the same zoo enclosures and everything until the 1920s. Okay. Okay. Hide this. All right. What did Ichthyornis dispar eat? It's one of our key organisms. Oh, people are reading them. That's awesome. Oh. 2/3 of you are. Okay, everyone's responded? Okay. And so, fish. So what was this critter? It's a bird. When did the bird live? Cretaceous, right. So it's a fish-eating bird of the Cretaceous, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of birds were then, fish eaters, and also it had teeth. Okay, so birds that evolved flight, they had evolved loss of teeth yet. Right. Last good question. The last one, hopefully. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay. So yes, allopatric's most common. Right, a lot of evidence for allopatric. There is some evidence for sympatry. Hybridization might lead to some speciation events, but not very often. Okay, but we do see it in cases like those sunflowers we talked about a few weeks ago. Okay, and metaphasic and interphasic were made up words based on mitosis. So there's no metaphasic or interphasic speciation. Okay, so sex. So why is sex costly? We say sex has a twofold cost, right? Well, what is it? Let's walk through this. So here I have peacock and peahen, and here I have an asexual peahen. Okay. And so first generation, that female produces, say, 2 eggs, and this female, and then 2 eggs more, and that her daughter produces 2 eggs more. Okay. Whereas the asexual one produces 2 eggs, each of those produces 2 eggs. Right. So what do we see here? Why might sex be costly given this little diagram? Fewer offspring. Yep. So males are a waste, right? Right. So in terms of population growth, this population grows much faster. So that's a huge cost. But the other thing is involving the natural selection, right? If you have something that has a 1% advantage, it has a good chance of being fixed, right? If you have something that has a twofold advantage, right? And yet we see all over life lots of sex, right? So why is that? Okay. Here this is showing the females throughout the time, right? So each case is called the twofold cost. Okay, so that's one cost for sex. So you say why sex is weird. All right. Another example. So for this female, if she has offspring, half of her genes are passed on, half don't for her offspring. Right? For her, all of her genes are passed on. Okay, so on a genetic level too, genes and organisms in mothers who have sex, due to how we have sexual reproduction and meiosis, and through this haploid process, are passed on less. Right? So it's not a cost. Okay? So we have all these costs. Okay? Plus there's other costs. Anytime you have to interact with an organism, there's a chance it will eat you, or give you disease, take your food, that sort of thing too. Right? So it's not yet another cost. Plus there's the whole cost of trying to find a mate. Right? And attract the mate and that sort of thing. So you saw the intro video of the bird of paradise do its little dance thing, right? It's not eating then. It's not hiding from predators. It's just dancing. Right? That's a cost. And that's sexual selection. You don't have to actually do that, right? So for example, there are some male insects that will crawl along and drop a sperm packet and keep going. The female insect will come along and say, "Oh, nice sperm packet," and impregnate them and fertilize themselves. Right? So you don't have to waste any time with the dancing. Right? So that's not a necessary cost of sex, but often involves. Okay. So one thing you might think about is that maybe the sex evolved once and you can't get out of it. Right? That's the hypothesis. Right? But actually we see that there are many parthenogenetic, virgin birth, asexual, actually reproducing species. Okay, so some stick insects, many plants, aphids. Some actually female aphids are born with eggs already, so they're born pregnant effectively. As we have to speed up the generation times, right? Some lizards, some bees. Yeah. A species that can lay eggs without having to have sex first. So virgin birth. Right? And so, in this case, this species is asexual. It's happy, it's fine, it produces, survives. Yes. I mean, there could sometimes be males produced, but typically they're all female. Yeah. That's actually one way you infer it is if all we see are females, then it's probably likely the parthenogenesis. Okay. There's always the case, there's always the risk that you're missing males. If you think like anglerfish, males are just a little lump of flesh on the side of a female. You happen to catch one while it's searching, and so then you might mistake it as a parthenogenetic species, but there actually are males. But yeah, in general, if you find the case where there's very, very few males, think it's parthenogenesis. Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah. So the latter question, yes. So why do we care about deleted rotifers so much? Well, because they're asexual and we think they've been asexual for a long time. So most asexual things are recently evolved. And so we think that lack of sex is in the long term an evolutionary dead end. But you're right, in the fossil record we could look and see if there has been evidence of asexuality. But I'm trying to think what evidence that would be. So I guess if you had a big enough sample and you could show that you have no males, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Research project. Yeah. It's cool to see how shallow you have to dig to find stuff that's not known in biology. We know a lot already, but there's so much out there that there's a lot that still needs to be discovered. So it makes it a cool field to work in. Okay, other questions? These are great questions. Okay. So here's one idea of an advantage of sex. Okay. And it's sort of time to fixation of beneficial alleles. Right? So one thing we have in sex is recombination. Right? And so if you look at a non-sexual species, if I have lowercase ab, and the optimal is capital AB, right? How can I get there? Well, I get there by changing capital B first, or changing capital B first. And do the same thing in the sexual species. The sexual species, after recombination, can have big B join with big A. Right? And in asexual species, you have to wait for the element to evolve in this group or in this group. Right? So the time to get to big A, big B is longer. If the unit evolves more than once, you have to wait for it to evolve something that already has evolved the other adaptive allele. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's where recombination is helpful. Okay. Another case is something called Muller's ratchet. So this is what a ratchet is. You don't know mechanics, right? So it's a device that turns one way. Right? And so here's a little pawl, flips in, and turns the gear one way. So that's the common English use of the word. Here it is in terms of sex, right? So in this case, let's assume that at the beginning, this is something optimal. Okay? And occasionally we get mutations. Okay? Well, why aren't they instantly purged if they're deleterious mutations? So in this population, these two are more fit than these two. This one has more offspring than this one does. How can that happen? Does natural selection work? And any change from the black one is deleterious, right? And yet we see in this case that, the blue one has increased frequency relative to this one. How can that happen? It's natural selection. Despite natural selection. Chance, right? So we have a finite population size. Right? And so this one, on average, might have 1.1 offspring, and on average has 0.9 offspring. Right? But by chance, this one could have none, this one could have some. Right? That when we're in smaller big populations. That's sort of chance inversion of what you expect in natural selection. small, right? So if we have smaller populations, the chances of a deleterious allele reaching fixation are higher, right? Okay. So if we have a small population like this, and we lack recombination, you know, so we might select into one of them, but at some point, everyone's going to have this one mutation, right? And now the entire population is less fit than it was originally, right? Because now there's no more of these ones. You have to re-evolve by having another mutation at the exact same point to get rid of that. Okay? So you get this ratcheting where first we have fitness of 1, which we have fitness of 0.99, and fitness of 0.88, so forth, downhill. That's Miller's ratchet. How does sex prevent this? Again, recombination to the rescue, right? So these two, when they have sex and combine, we could have, by chance, one of us can have two of these deleterious mutations up for it, but its sister has none. Oh, and now we have variation again that includes the optimal phenotype, the optimal genotype. Okay, so we can escape this downhill ratcheting. Does that make sense? People seem a little. Ask questions.
So, having sex just helps by increasing the amount of available genotypes for the offspring.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, would the offspring with the deleterious mutation be able to reproduce then?
Maybe, or might get wiped out.
Okay.
But the overall
the fact that the optimal is there is a better thing then.
Right.
Okay.
Because, you know, so let's assume we have this parent can, someone can have sex, someone can't have sex. Which of those traits we selected for? Those one can't have sex, and some offspring are worse as a result, some are better as a result, right? And so if overall, the fact that having better offspring does much better than everything else, and so it can survive better and have more offspring, then it's worth the cost of having that offspring. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So explain what that is.
So one is independent assortment. It's credited to Michael, meaning that there's a chromosome sort independently of another when they come to metaphase one stage of meiosis. So there's all these possible combinations of all these chromosomes to that. So there's a lot of variation so it's
And so here we have three chromosome pairs. Then the offspring can have, the gamete can have. Actually, it's better. The gamete can have black, red, black. It could have red, red, red. Okay, independently. Right, so it's another way. So if these are on separate, separate chromosomes, we'll actually do that too. Right. Then you gotta go down to the haploid and back up. Yeah.
So does sexual reproduction get rid of all of ratchet?
Mm-hmm. Helps you escape from it. It slows it down, right? I mean, you can have a situation where a deleterious allele sweeps through all of the population, right? But yeah, but it sort of slows it down. And Muller's ratchet is typically, Muller's ratchet is typically used to apply to this situation of asexual reproduction, as an explanation for why sex is advantageous, but the overall process that talks about this, the decrease in fitness can happen every day. Yeah, good questions. What else? Let's get this. Okay. Here's where thinking about just increasing variation itself is helpful. Okay. So if we were in a stable environment, nothing changing, then if you think about those simulations we did a couple days ago, where we had the population moving through time to follow an optimum. We had this variation at the tips, right? Because nothing was at the optimum. These kept getting away from it, right? Well, sex measures the variability. So if we're at this nice little peak, maybe it's advantageous not to have our offspring somewhere off that, right? Or if you think of geosthesia, here's seed size, right? If in corresponds to beak depth, right? Narrow beak, big beak. It could be that if these two reproduce, the offspring in the middle, they don't eat very well, right? And so they want to have lack of sex, which is asexual reproduction, right? If you have things that are also evolving after you, it can be advantageous to have sex, right? So the fitness peak is always, something other than where you are. So it's a very cool case. The white ones are asexuals, and the gray ones are sexuals. These are the population. Right, so here we have these are increasing and dropping off, increasing again, dropping off. Okay. And here we have under low parasite pressure and high parasite pressure. Okay. So let's see what's going on here. And look at the first plot. The first plot shows here's the clones doing well, right? And they could have more offspring than sex, but then parasites go off to it. So why might sex be good in this case? Be advantageous. There's variability, and so it's harder for parasites to deal with it. A good analogy might be if you're thinking about gazelles and lions, right? So if you have a population of asexual gazelles that whenever they're chased by a lion always run straight for 100 yards, turn right, turn left, jump, turn left again, turn right. At some point, lions are going to evolve to always be, oh, it's right over here, right? But if you have variation, such that they run different ways, right? Lions can evolve to that one adaptive phenotype. You have to be able to deal with that variability. Okay. It's the same thing here. These asexuals do better at first, right? But at some point the parasites start to co-evolve and like that. So we have a lot of parasites, we have very high frequency for that happens. With a few parasites, we get higher. Yep. Here's the same case. So here we've got a proportion of males, it's approximately how many are asexual. Right? They start going down, and the parasites start going up, working really well, and then the sexual start doing better. There's not a possible explanation for why have sex. Okay, and here's our friend. We know what this is. I've done the dancing enough. Yeah, delayed rotifer. So here's a case where it looks like we look at their whole genomes, they haven't had sex in a while. Okay, tens of millions of years, perhaps 100 million years. And so here we think they escape this parasite pressure by forming cysts and moving from one pond to another pond when the pond dries up. Okay. So rather than out-evolving your parasite, you outrun it. Okay? But we know about these things because it's rare. That strategy doesn't happen very often. Okay? So that's the part of the lecture showing like some of the costs of sex and some of the benefits of sex, why I think sex evolves, and why things that involve asexuality eventually go extinct. Any questions about that? Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, but that which would help give some variation that way too. Yeah. Good. Other questions? And thinking back about Miles Ratchet, so a lot of bacteria we think are largely asexual. They can also, I mean, that's not as clean as it used to be. I mean, they can exchange plasmids and other ways of exchanging DNA, but they're largely asexual. That's why might Miles Ratchet be less important for bacteria than for eukaryotes, especially liquids. Right, so one of the things they can sort of, even though they're asexual, they can still pull in DNA from other places. Ooh, that's good, let's try that gene. Yeah. Okay. What else? Right. So selection is more efficient with large population size, right? And so there are more bacteria living in you than there are humans on the planet. It's a huge population size in bacteria. And so selection will be more efficient at pruning out these deleterious mutations. Right? And so Miles Ratchet clicks much more slowly for bacteria than it would be for elephants. So less pressure on them to do that. Okay? Good. Other questions? Okay. So why do we have? So we often see in nature an even sex ratio, right? In humans, it's slightly more females and males, I believe, or maybe it's males and females at this point, but very close to 50-50. In lots of different groups, it's close to 50-50. Right? So I should think about why that might be. So here we have a population, and let's say we have this frequency of males and females. Right? 20% males. If that's the case, what's the expected fitness of each of these in the population? Okay, why do you say that?
You said it would be the opposite because the males just have a higher chance of finding a female.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Yep. That's a good question, right? So, let's assume that, and for this case, there's monogamy, and so you can only pair up with one partner of the other sex. Yeah, good. So you're still right. The males would have higher fitness, right? Because on average, this male can really find a mate, whereas this female has to move always females to mate. And so there's a good chance of having no mates at all. Right? Actually, we think of it as, even if we allow multiple matings, right? Well, then, in this population, half the offspring, assuming everyone has equal chance of mating, half the offspring come from this male, right? Only a quarter of the offspring come from this female. Right? That's another reason why we think that this is going to be higher fitness. Okay? And so, this is an idea known as Fisher's principle, right? Where populations evolve towards 50-50 sex ratios, because if it's not 50-50, then the less frequent sex has higher fitness. Right? So it's brought about by this frequency-dependent selection. Okay, so that's with some stability. And so that's why so in humans we have our whole XY system, right? Where we expect 50-50 chance of having offspring that's female or male, right? Subject to different mortality by gender. There are things that have, like, say, temperature-dependent selection, temperature-dependent sex, like turtles or crocodilians, right? Where if it's warmer, there can be females; if it's cooler, there can be males. And so that set point can evolve. So you could evolve it easily to be all female or all male, right? But evolve such that the population is 50-50 for each sex, okay, because of this principle. Okay, well, how do I explain this? So you can see this. We talked about this a little bit earlier on. So here are the beetles, okay, and here's the ratio of males to females in this population. So 0.05, 0.95, very far from 0.5. So I can explain this perhaps. Oh, that's a good point. Yep. So that's not the case here. That's something I should have brought up, right? So some fish, they'll, I think sheepshead wrasse are one, where most of the fish are female, and the biggest one is the male. And then when he dies, the next biggest female becomes male. Right? Another case where we have a weird sex ratio. Right. But, yep. Good. And that allows the individual population to have a higher reproductive rate. I'm not sure about how that affects with how that deals with Fisher's principle, though. I should look into that. Because it's an interesting exception to think about. Good. In this case, what we have going on is inbreeding. Okay, so this is a case I mentioned earlier of bark beetles, where this is the male, this is the female. Okay? So the male is adapted for impregnating his sisters and going next door and impregnating those females. Okay, and so for their mother, right? Her fitness is best by having the most daughters at that whole twofold cost, right? While still allowing for some sex. So that, and also, the ones reproducing each other are closely related to each other, and so. His fitness is enhanced by having many grandchildren, right, and so forth. And so, due to these factors of this inbreeding and sort of family level selection, we can have this bias-sex ratio evolve. Okay. I will look up about the sex changes. I'm something I hadn't thought of that. Okay, so sexual selection. So what kinds of sexual selection are there in nature? Well, one we think of, we see a lot, is male-male competition, right? So bighorn sheep battering each other's heads, elephant seals waging huge bloody battles on the beach, right? And these can matter. So, for example, in elephant seals, over 90% of the males die without ever mating at all. Okay, and so you get really strong selection for winning these contests. Okay, and they're very costly. Right, and so as males evolve other strategies like waiting offshore, trying to sneak mating with females. The female might want to mate with the beach master, but also want to have some variability in her offspring and mate with another male that's nearby. So he might get some matings that way. Okay. But we see this expensive male-male competition happening a lot. I mean, these guys, while they're doing this, they don't eat. They don't feed predators. They just sit on the beach all breeding season, defending their patch of turf. Okay. So that's sort of a dominant one we often see. There's also female choice. And this is another case where we look at conflict between sexual selection and natural selection. Right? So here are our friends, the Tungara frogs again. Right there. Yeah. Okay. We looked at the reconstruction of these early in the phylogenetics part. And some of them have evolved a very sexy, and females love that. But so do other things. And the animal's eating, it's happy. It's good. So males that do this clicking are sexier and have more mates, but they're also subject to higher predation. The bats can hone in them better. Okay? So in the case of this trade-off between being sexy and being alive. Okay? Okay. So, different ways that things have sexual selection, and what sort of traits that might be favored. Right? So, scramble competition. Okay. So, what do you know about that in general? So, was it just regularly old ecology for scramble competition versus interference competition? Isn't taught in ecology anymore? What? Okay. All right, what do we call it now? Yep. Right.
Exploitation.
Okay. Exploitation. Yeah. So when I was learning this, it was scramble competition. Because ecology moves on. Yeah. So exploitation competition, right, where you have this resource and you just try to gather as much as you can, right? So if I threw, M&Ms into the classroom, right, you could just all grab whatever's nearby. But interference would be you defend your territory and like smacking someone around, right? And so some mating events are scramble competition too. So, for example, in some ants, a queen will fly off and the males will just mob her, and I'll try to mate with her, right? And so if that's the situation, then he who flies fastest and finds the females best does best. And so you see traits like that evolving. Endurance rivalry is another way. So in dragonflies, a male defends a patch of pond and mates with females that come there. Okay? And while he's doing that, he's not eating very much. And so he might have to then go into the forest periodically to forage. And so the male that can survive longest doing this wins. Bombaliids, bee flies, will, so the flies look like bees, will sort of hover in one place for a while as males advertising. And sometimes they'll just stay so long they'll just drop dead out of exhaustion. Right? But before you do that, you can mate. That's great, right? So, contests. So here are the elephant seals and the bighorn sheep. So you expect traits to evolve that lead to winning those sorts of fights. Okay, mate choice. Okay, so one is things that attract or stimulate mates, right? So the beautiful array of dung and flowers that bowerbirds make. Other things you could offer gifts to the female, right? So some insects will kill something and then bring it to the female and say, "Hey, have this." And while she's having that, they'll mate. This is effective then giving his offspring more nutrition. There's some spiders where, while mating, the male will fling himself into the female's jaws and sort of eat me. And if she doesn't eat him, he'll keep trying until she does. Right? And then he can still mate while being eaten. And so he'll have more offspring that way, and also the offspring get a better start by sacrificing himself that way. Okay. Coercion. Okay, so this happens in nature too. So there was a Ig Nobel Prize award a few years ago for a duck that tried to mate with a dead duck. Right, so duck mating can be very violent, and ducks will swoop in and tries to mate. Okay, so the traits that evolve for that. Sperm competition. Okay, so if a female mates with multiple mates, the multiple multiple fathers in there. So which ones win? So there's various ways of competing there. And so that you can displace rival sperm, you can have swim faster, all different ways of computing. Okay. Infanticide, okay, seems weird, right? But we think about like gorillas or lions. When they take over a new group, they'll kill the infants, right? And the females are reproductive. So if you're a male, you protect your infants, you'll have offspring. But if you can't, then the other male will take over and have more offspring. Okay, so these are all different mechanisms for sexual selection. Okay, and oftentimes they're opposed by natural selection. Okay, so again, evolution is all about trade-offs. So are there questions about sexual selection or evolution of sex? Yeah. So they do. So they do try to protect their young, right? But but if they lose, then their incentives flip, right? So while your offspring is still alive, protect it because you invest all these resources into it. If you fail to protect it and it's dead, then now what you want to do is have more offspring. So the incentives flip. So those females are fittest who will most quickly remate. So it's sort of weird when you think about it. So like think about human emotions. You would be like, oh, great, okay. But in the natural selection, I mean, that's what would happen. Does that make sense? Yeah. What else? Other questions? Okay. So remember, I'll send out the midterm soon. I'm traveling to Switzerland to teach on Friday, so I won't be here, but someone else will be teaching you. I'll send out the midterm ahead of time. Don't talk to each other about it or any other human, or don't post in a discussion forum. Hey, I have a great question. Okay, but you can look up. You can use the notes. You can use Wikipedia. You can use textbooks, anything like that. Okay. Good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So here's a good question. Should you have a bibliography in your midterm, right? So if you're writing a scientific paper, you want to cite all your sources, right? For the midterm, treat it as if it were like in-class midterm, right? So you don't need to say, so you might say, Fisher said this, or Darwin said this. You don't need to cite things, okay? So you can if you want to. Yeah. Yeah, but the questions are written such that most people don't use graphs like that. But yeah.